There was a time when the valley was alive. Not famous, not rich, but alive. Morning smoke rose from chimneys like quiet signals of life. Trucks rolled down the narrow road before sunrise. Store doors opened with the sound of old metal bells. Farmers waved to factory workers. Mechanics drank coffee before the first engine started. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. The valley had one river, one highway, and one factory that kept everything moving. For nearly 40 years, that factory was the heartbeat of the entire region. It built agricultural equipment, heavy machines that farmers across the country relied on. Every morning, hundreds of workers filled the parking lot. Welding sparks flashed behind steel doors. Delivery trucks lined the road like a convoy of opportunity. The town lived on those paychecks. Then one year, everything changed. The company announced it would relocate production overseas. Cheaper labor, bigger profit margins, corporate language that sounded clean and logical on paper. But in the valley, it meant something else. Silence. Within 6 months, the factory shut down. The machines were dismantled. Office lights went dark. Trucks stopped arriving. And the valley began to empty. Families packed moving trucks. Houses went up for sale. Local shops closed their doors one by one. The diner that once served breakfast to factory workers started opening later, then eventually stopped opening at all. The school lost students. The hardware store lost customers. The valley lost its reason to stay. Over the next 5 years, the population dropped by almost half. Grass grew through the cracks in the old factory parking lot. Wind moved through broken windows. The enormous building, once loud with industry, stood like a skeleton of the past. People who passed through called it a ghost valley. Most assumed the story was over. Places like this rarely come back. Once the jobs disappear, the people follow. Once the people leave, businesses collapse. And when that cycle begins, it rarely reverses. But the valley still had one resident who refused to leave. His name was Lucas Bennett. Lucas Bennett was 38 years old, an industrial engineer who had grown up in the valley when the factory was still thriving. His father had worked there as a machinist for 22 years. Lucas remembered the valley differently. He remembered crowded football games under bright stadium lights, summer festivals near the river, pickup trucks parked outside diners filled with laughter and tired workers finishing long shifts. When the factory closed, Lucas had already left for college and built a career in a nearby city. Like many others, he assumed the valley would slowly disappear. Until one afternoon, when he drove back. The road into the valley felt unfamiliar. Gas stations were boarded up. Fields looked neglected. Empty houses sat quietly along the road like forgotten memories. When Lucas reached the old factory, he pulled his truck to the side of the road. The building was enormous. 600,000 square feet of rusting steel and silent machinery. Grass had swallowed half the parking lot. Windows were broken. The company logo still hung above the entrance, faded and peeling under the sun. Lucas stepped out of the truck. Wind moved through the empty structure with a hollow echo. For a moment, it looked like the valley's story had truly ended. Most people saw a ruin. Lucas saw something else. He saw infrastructure, rail access, highway proximity, industrial power lines, warehouses, machines that had been left behind, and something even more valuable, space. Cheap space. The kind of space businesses in crowded cities could never afford anymore. Standing there in the silence of the abandoned factory, a strange idea began to form. What if the valley wasn't finished? What if everyone had left too soon? Lucas walked through the broken front gate. Dust covered the floors inside. Old equipment stood frozen in place. A single shaft of sunlight fell through a cracked roof panel, illuminating a line of dormant assembly machines. It looked like time had simply stopped. And that's when the idea became a decision. Lucas didn't see a ghost town. He saw an opportunity no one else was looking at. A place where land was cheap. A place with existing infrastructure. A place where people would come back if there was work again. But rebuilding a valley was not a simple plan. Buying the factory alone would require millions. Convincing companies to move there would be even harder. And everyone he talked to had the same response. They laughed. No investors wanted to touch a dead town. Banks refused the loans. Business partners told him he was chasing a fantasy. One friend said something Lucas would never forget. Places like that don't come back. But Lucas Bennett had grown up in that valley. He knew what it used to be, and he believed something most people didn't. Sometimes opportunity hides in the exact places everyone else abandons. The question wasn't whether the valley could come back. The question was whether one person could start it. So Lucas did something that surprised everyone. He made an offer to buy the factory, not because it was profitable, but because he believed the valley's story wasn't over yet. And what happened next would change the entire region. When Lucas Bennett made the offer to buy the abandoned factory, almost no one believed it would actually happen. The building had been sitting empty for nearly 6 years. The previous owners had tried to sell it multiple times. Investors walked through the property, studied the numbers, and quietly walked away. Maintaining a structure that large without active production was expensive. The roof needed repairs. Electrical systems were outdated. Rust had started creeping across machines that once built thousands of agricultural parts every week. To most buyers, it looked like a financial disaster waiting to happen. But Lucas looked at the situation differently. Where others saw decay, he saw potential. And more importantly, he saw timing. Across the country, small manufacturers were struggling with rising rent in major industrial zones. Warehouses in cities were becoming unaffordable. Logistics costs were increasing every year. Companies needed space to build, store, and ship products. Lucas believed the valley could become something new. Not a single large factory like before, but a network of smaller businesses. A place where manufacturing, storage, and logistics companies could operate together. The idea was simple in theory. Turn the abandoned factory into a shared industrial hub. Divide the massive building into smaller sections. Renovate key areas. Offer affordable leases to companies that needed space. But the problem was money. Buying the factory required nearly every dollar Lucas had saved during his engineering career. The renovation would cost even more. Banks were still refusing to lend. The valley had no economic activity, no proven demand, no clear evidence that businesses would actually move there. To lenders, Lucas's plan looked like a gamble. But Lucas had something the banks didn't. He had patience. Instead of chasing large corporate investors, he started talking directly to small business owners. Metal fabricators, equipment repair companies, agricultural suppliers, e-commerce storage operations. He visited workshops, industrial yards, and trade events across nearby cities. And everywhere he went, he heard the same complaint. We're running out of space. City rent was crushing small manufacturers. Many were operating out of cramped buildings where expansion was impossible. When Lucas showed them photos of the Valley factory, their reaction was always the same. They couldn't believe the size of it. But the next question was always the difficult one. Where is it? And when Lucas explained the location, the quiet valley where half the town had already moved away, the excitement usually faded. No one wanted to move to a place with no activity. No restaurants. No services. No workforce. No guarantee that the experiment would work. Lucas realized the valley had a classic problem. Businesses wouldn't move there because there were no jobs. But jobs wouldn't appear until businesses moved there. The cycle had to be broken somehow. So Lucas made a decision that surprised everyone again. Instead of waiting for companies to arrive, he started rebuilding first. He hired local contractors, many of them former factory workers who had been unemployed for years. The roof was repaired. Broken windows were replaced. Electrical systems were upgraded. The enormous interior was divided into smaller production zones. Slowly, light returned to sections of the building that had been dark for nearly a decade. For the first time in years, the factory parking lot had trucks again. Not delivery trucks. Construction trucks. People in the valley began to notice. At first, they assumed it was temporary. Maybe someone had bought the building to tear it down. Maybe a warehouse company was planning to store equipment there. But Lucas kept working. Every week, more repairs. More equipment. More activity. Word began to spread beyond the valley. An old factory was coming back to life. Then something unexpected happened. The first tenant arrived. It wasn't a giant corporation. It was a small agricultural parts manufacturer with 12 employees. Their city lease had doubled in price, and they needed space for larger machines. Lucas offered them something they couldn't find anywhere else. 10,000 square feet of production space. Affordable rent. Direct highway access. They moved in within 2 months. And suddenly, the valley had its first new jobs in nearly 10 years. The effect was immediate. Workers started commuting again. Gas stations reopened. The small diner near the highway turned its lights back on. A mechanic shop reopened its garage doors. The valley, which had been silent for years, began making noise again. Lucas knew one company wasn't enough. But it was proof. proof that the idea could work. So he kept going. More renovations, more outreach to business owners, more conversations with companies desperate for affordable industrial space. 6 months later, 2 more businesses moved in. Then another. Then another. Within 2 years, the once abandoned factory had been transformed into something completely different. A cluster of independent businesses, each one small, but together powerful. Metal workers, machine repair specialists, agricultural suppliers, packaging companies, online retail storage operations. Each company hiring local workers. Each company bringing life back to the valley. And slowly, something remarkable began to happen. People started moving back. Houses that had been empty for years were suddenly occupied again. Schools began gaining students. Local businesses reopened their doors. The valley that had once been written off as finished was starting to breathe again. But Lucas Bennett's plan was still far from complete. Because what happened next would turn the valley into something no one had imagined. And it would prove that one decision, made when everyone else walked away, could transform an entire region. By the 3rd year, the valley looked different. Not completely transformed. Not yet, but different enough that people who had left began noticing something unusual. Lights were on again at the factory. At night, trucks could be seen entering the valley road. Delivery vans rolled in and out during the day. The once empty parking lot now had rows of vehicles belonging to welders, technicians, warehouse workers, mechanics, and office staff. The building that had once symbolized the valley's collapse had become the center of its revival. But Lucas Bennett wasn't trying to rebuild the past. He knew the valley could never return to the single factory economy it once depended on. That system had collapsed the moment the corporation moved overseas. Instead, Lucas focused on something stronger. Diversification. Dozens of small businesses instead of one giant employer. Each company using a portion of the massive industrial complex. Each company growing at its own pace. And together, they created something far more stable than the valley had ever had before. The 4th tenant arrived after hearing about the project from another manufacturer. Then the 5th. Then the 8th. Within 3 years, nearly half the factory floor was operational again. The enormous building had been divided into independent sections, workshops, production areas, shipping zones, and storage facilities. The sound of machinery returned to the valley. Metal cutting, forklifts moving pallets, packaging lines sealing orders. For the first time in nearly a decade, the valley had real economic activity again. But the most surprising change was happening outside the factory. Local businesses began reopening. The old diner that once served factory workers every morning became busy again before sunrise. Truck drivers stopped there for coffee. Mechanics met customers over breakfast. Workers gathered after long shifts just like they had years before. A grocery store reopened. A small pharmacy followed. A construction company opened an office nearby to handle the growing demand for repairs and housing renovations. The valley's population started increasing for the first time in nearly 10 years. Some of the new residents were workers hired by the businesses inside Lucas's factory hub, but many were people who had left years earlier. They were coming back. Families who once believed the valley's story had ended began seeing a future there again. Lucas rarely talked about what he had built. He still worked quietly inside the factory complex, walking the floor, talking with business owners, fixing problems as they appeared. He was still wearing the same work boots and the same dark blue work shirt he had worn the day he first stepped inside the abandoned building. To him, the project was never about recognition. It was about proving something. That places people give up on too quickly sometimes still have value. But the true turning point came in the 5th year. That was when a regional logistics company visited the valley. They had heard about the cluster of small manufacturers operating inside the old factory. Their business depended on shipping products quickly between cities. When they saw the location, highway access, rail connections, and dozens of companies producing goods in one place, they realized something Lucas had already understood years earlier. The valley was becoming a logistics hub. The company built a distribution center on land just outside the factory property. Suddenly, the valley wasn't just producing goods. It was shipping them across the country. More jobs appeared. Truck drivers, warehouse coordinators, inventory managers, delivery crews. Within 2 years, the valley had more jobs than it had ever had during the old factory era. And unlike before, those jobs came from many different businesses. If one company struggled, the others kept operating. The economy was no longer fragile. It was resilient. 6 years after Lucas Bennett bought the abandoned factory, the transformation was undeniable. The building that once stood empty was now almost fully occupied. Over 20 companies operated inside the complex. Hundreds of workers arrived every morning. The valley that had nearly disappeared from the map was now growing again. Even real estate developers began paying attention. New housing construction started near the river. The school district expanded classrooms. The once forgotten valley had quietly become one of the fastest-growing economic areas in the region. And yet, if you asked Lucas how it happened, his answer was always simple. He didn't say he saved the valley. He didn't claim he predicted everything that followed. He only said one thing. Everyone else left too soon. Because the truth was, the valley had never truly been empty. It had land, infrastructure, history, and people who still wanted a reason to stay. All it needed was someone willing to see opportunity where everyone else saw failure. Today, if you drive into the valley at sunrise, you'll see something very different from the silent roads that once defined it. Delivery trucks heading toward the factory. Workers parking their cars before early shifts. Small businesses opening their doors. And in the distance, a massive industrial building humming with activity again. The same building that once stood abandoned. The same building everyone believed would never be used again. All because one person looked at a dying valley and saw the beginning of something new, that quietly along the road like forgotten memories. When Lucas reached the old factory, he pulled his truck to the side of the road. The building was enormous. 600,000 square feet of rusting steel and silent machinery. Grass had swallowed half the parking lot. Windows were broken. The company logo still hung above the entrance, faded and peeling under the sun. Lucas stepped out of the truck. Wind moved through the empty structure with a hollow echo. For a moment, it looked like the valley's story had truly ended. Most people saw a ruin. Lucas saw something else. He saw infrastructure, rail access, highway proximity, industrial power lines, warehouses, machines that had been left behind, and something even more valuable, space. Cheap space. The kind of space businesses in crowded cities could never afford anymore. Standing there in the silence of the abandoned factory, a strange idea began to form. What if the valley wasn't finished? What if everyone had left too soon? Lucas walked through the broken front gate. Dust covered the floors inside. Old equipment stood frozen in place. A single shaft of sunlight fell through a cracked roof panel, illuminating a line of dormant assembly machines. It looked like time had simply stopped. And that's when the idea became a decision. Lucas didn't see a ghost town. He saw an opportunity no one else was looking at. A place where land was cheap. A place with existing